We couldn't celebrate our 10th season of the Producer Podcast without reassembling the roundtable for a special episode. So buckle up for our season finale and 100th episode of the show as I sit down with producers Josh Walsh, Nathan Tauch, and Daryl Lefever to answer questions submitted by you, the listeners. Without further ado, let's get started. To kick things off, maybe this, I guess you could say a little bit more of like an icebreaker question, but just like what's something you've all been learning recently in the industry?
Mm,
Mm,
it's a good question.
That's a good question.
Man, learning, I always feel like film is such a great opportunity just to learn new things, man, because it's always changing. It doesn't seem like it ever sits still, you know? There's so many massive changes coming to film, AI, international versus domestic kind of responses by audiences. So I'd say there's so much I'm learning, but on a personal level, my career, a lot of the products we developed, it seemed clear at the time, like we were going to go make this film. And it was something we had been working on for a long time. Development seems to be, I just came out of a meeting with Daryl about development, and it just seems to be a new and exciting and scary kind of process for me, especially as an independent producer. Producers don't get paid during the development process. This is a disparity that has been talked about on some great podcasts about how producers live with products for many many years and they only get paid once the movie gets into production. But you have to continually keep kind of a pipeline of products flowing. So for me, like I've been trying to learn and to really stretch myself on what the audience, um, you know, how much do you get from the audience as far as what they're wanting out of products, thinking ahead of what products are going to work in what kind of environment, especially like the theatrical business has changed so much over the last 5 years, and what movies work and what movies don't, that it's definitely affects how you develop products. And so that development process, and what I'm spending my time on is something that I'm learning a lot about right now. How to engage a lot of talent on these projects, how to work with studios versus independent. This is where my world is a lot right now. So I'd say that's probably where I'm learning the most and trying to learn more.
Man, yeah, that sounds like a whole podcast just
Yeah,
on
that,
that
I'll let you
topic.
know. I'll let you know how it turns out. I guess you'll know in a few years if
yeah.
it works.
Yeah.
That's funny that you mentioned AI. I can kind of bounce off that with our workflow. The changes in our workflow with the live event space and doing like multicam records and things. You're finding smaller crews with very very technically minded individuals and people who can really do a lot of damage really quick. They're experts in their field, and those massive crews that we used to have for like studio work have really whittled down to a pretty fair size. And I remember working in some studios where we do car scenes, or we do something very contained where we have projection in the back and we're battling the projectors and the different frame rates and the color temperatures and the balances and everything, and moving away from green screen. Well, now we're using all LED walls. We're using a lot of ghost framing with Pixera and Disguise, and a lot of this new technology is there's a lot of undocumented techniques and technical cases, and it's very hard to find information without going to the actual manufacturers or the actual support teams for these pieces of gear and these collaborative engines that are driving a lot of the backgrounds, a lot of the contents in content spaces, and a lot of the set pieces that we used to just build, and it was a ton of money, and now it's still a ton of money. but at the same time, it's difficult to find that talent now and it's difficult to find the answers that you need for the projects that are put in front of us, and especially in a studio environment. And for our use cases, trying to find gear that is stable enough to work in a live environment. And this is something that I've been working on in for the past 3 years. XR integration into live events, live image tracking, live rotoscoping, live green screen effects, kind of what they're doing in Japan right now with a lot of the K-pop artists. We're trying to reproduce this for small corporate events. Honestly, these are not massive projects. These are just Fortune 500 companies that want these cool things that they see around the globe, and they want to do it in a ballroom at the Hyatt. Now, how how do you go about doing that? That is the trick when you don't have a 500 $600,000 budget, and you're thrown like, hey, this is an 80 grand project. What can you make happen for us? And it has to be done on the weekend. And it's a lot of struggle in finding the right technologies and the right engines that'll actually function, and the people as well. It's been a struggle and something I'm learning more about, and learning how to find that kind of talent in a very niche market.
As I think through this, what you've been learning lately, I think like Josh and Nathan both talk about more sort of technical and business things. I think mine is more probably more an emotional thing, like because I've always been freelance, right? Like for 32 years, I've been a freelance guy. I go from movie to movie, get the movie made, try to get it made on schedule and on budget, all that kind of stuff. And so I was never a part of development or a part of really, I mean, a couple of times I was on throughout post on really big movies, but mostly to watch visual effects and stuff, but from a budget point of view. But now that I'm here from, concept to screen, right? I think it's a lot more empathy for all the other things that come before me and the things that come after me, because now that's me too, So I used to be able to just if we got through production, it's like, well, post isn't my problem. Like as long as they should have budgeted enough money for post, right? Like I know that's not my problem. Get through post, and same way with development. Like why is it taking so long to get the script done? Like we need to start shooting and all that. So I think mine is just the broader and broader as I step back from, because there's so many silos in this business, right? Like everybody's in a different silo. Especially if you're literally in a department, then you're really just in that silo. And then producing, you're kind of in charge of all the silos, but still only to a certain degree. And now that I'm here full time and through the entire process, like there's so many levels to this. There's so many different people that have hands in it. And so really appreciating what each person brings to it and the time it takes for each aspect of it. Yeah, I think that's what I'm learning. Yeah, and also empathizing more with directors,
Yeah.
just empathizing more with what's the weight that they carry, the responsibility, them having to drop shots because the day just isn't going the way they wanted, right? And when you're on the production side, it's like, we'll just drop the shot. Like we'll move on, we'll cut it together, it'll work, but then there's an emotional tie to that shot, right? Because you planned it and you wanted, so just sort of having more and more empathy for what each person's role is, and learning more about each role too. It kind of coincides with learning the aspects and responsibilities of all the different jobs that I didn't used to have to engage with. But because like I say, I was always a production guy, so I was always from day one of prep till the end of the shoot, I was there. But before that and after that, I wasn't really a part of it. So yeah,
I think that's the amazing thing about film, right? It's that it takes so many talented people, but it is this homogenation of creativity, technology, finance, marketing. It's like all these, and it takes everybody at the top of their game, and no one could be good at all those things. So as a producer, to Daryl's point, understanding and having empathy to what does it take technically to do these things? Because again, we might only view it as on a budget and look at it and go, really? Do they need this? But then on the day when you're struggling to make your day because you don't have the right people or equipment and it costs you a day, all of a sudden it becomes very real to everybody. Like talking about Nathan, those LED walls have become incredibly present in feature film production now as a cut through. But I don't know, like Daryl can speak to it as well, but we haven't had a ton of success with those. It always seems that there's so much, and I know that people are having tremendous success, so don't hear me being down on those walls, but talking about the chasm between kind of concept and practical implication. Like more often than not, I've been a part of productions that they talk about how wonderful this is going to be and how we're going to save so much time and money, and then we show up on set, it's not working, they just throw a green screen up on the LED wall, and you're all sitting there in this very expensive studio asking yourself, why are we just not shooting this behind a green screen? We're spending getting, like you said, the technology is emerging very quickly, but there's also so much implication, like to the level that there's not really a manual for this. There's not a lot of people that have tons of experience yet. So these are the interesting, and that again, that's that harmony between technology and creative and finance that is always bouncing back and forth when you're making these things.
Absolutely. And you're breaking my heart about the LED, but
it's because we didn't have you. Because we didn't have you.
Well, and that's the struggle is the actual R&D that's happening with a lot of these media servers and technologies. Everyone is limited by budget. That's the sad truth, because at a certain point, if you had enough budget, you can make almost any project go smoothly, but it just does not work that way. And like not everybody has a studio like The Mandalorian. Not everybody has that access, and so like that has been an interesting thing here in Chicago, even with Cinespace and a couple other venues where we've done pop-up productions where there's lack of communication between like cameras and your engine operators and your LED, and then suddenly you're in this whole world like, what do we even do? Because there was not enough pre-pro and the right technical minds did not get together to fix these foreseeable issues. And then there's also a lot of people in, hopefully none of my buddies are listening to this. No,
Mike is hoping they're all listening.
Yeah. There's a lot of technical people who are in the industry that should not be.
Yeah.
And especially on such a cutting edge position, there has to be proper training. And coming from the events world, there's barely anybody who has certifications at a medium tier level. You have people who've just lived off of experience for years and years and years, and that's fine. But when you get into those high risk scenarios, you need people who know what they're doing, and the vetting and the pre-production process has to be done to a T to make these complicated systems function in a cohesive way. Especially when the R&D for those systems itself is not there.
Yeah.
It's just not. And like as much as the manufacturers, as much as the salesman will pitch and pitch and pitch, it's not there. And we've even struggled with getting things to 4K canvas systems and actually integration of super high frame rates for proper effects at like the mid-tier level. And this is not complicated things. There just isn't the R&D between manufacturers. People don't share information. And then you have niche products working with other niche products, and then you combine everything together and suddenly, well, why doesn't this work?
So what we're saying is, if you're going to use this in a movie, spend a little time before you start filming, and those days are super expensive to test it, and hire Nathan.
Yeah, it will be expensive, but
it will be expensive.
Everything will be expensive. But also like that's kind of not to diss too much on the high res technology and the LED systems and all that, but there are a lot of classical techniques that are really a little bit more advantageous for productions. If you've seen the Barbie movie, their entire sequence where they have practical moving props in the background while they basically are on a treadmill walking. What a phenomenal,
That's cool.
phenomenal effect. And could you go into a studio? Could you go right now and spend $180,000, go into a studio and do the exact same thing with with an LED system? Of course, and you could put all that into visual effects. You could do all that, but also you kind of strip away a little bit of that family feel that comes from bringing that all together.
That's true. That's true. There's a whole podcast on that too. We could have on visual effects and and special effects. It'd be be compelling.
I did have a question though, for Daryl though, about I don't know. This is the longest answer to this session. I'm sorry, Micah.
One question then.
Yeah, one question. That's the whole podcast. So I'm curious. From what I gathered from your answer was patience, a new understanding of patience for yourself in a full-time capacity versus freelance capacity. I'm curious, what has been more of a struggle with you in the pre-production phase, production, or post-production, and what has changed in the course of your career? Like, did you hate one part of it a little bit more because there was more one-on-one struggles, or was it more scope? Like, what's a kind of then and now for yourself? If you could dive in a little bit deeper.
Let's see. So my background, I started off as a driver, right? And I drove a minivan. That was my first job. And then I got into accounting. I did accounting for about 14 years and worked my way up to production accountant. So I was doing giant movies for Warner Brothers, like Polar Express and things like that. And then got into producing around 2008 with members of this team of Kingdom. So all of that was mostly up until until 3 years ago when I started coming here full time and working here full time. It was all about production, right? So it was all about keeping the movie on schedule, on budget, hammering everything down. That was the job. Was whether I was the accountant or because when I was an accountant, it was on big movies like that. You're kind of like a UPM on small movies, really, because it's your job to keep it on budget. So really, I was all about that. Like, how do we keep from going over budget? So now, where I have to switch hats is, I always cared that it would be a good movie, right? But now I really care that it's a good movie, right? Because I'm not just in charge of finance. I'm a producer on the film. So when it comes to marketing release time, like, it needs to be a great film. So patience is definitely a word for it. Having a lot more patience for the creative process, not just trying to nip and tuck where you can to save money, but trying to really, really squeeze. It's a different mindset to just say, well, we need to drop the scene or we need to do this and that to save money, right? Even if it's in the prep phase, just during the script, like, well, we're going to have to cut pages out. You just got to cut pages. Versus being the producer that really wants to, how can we keep that beat in the story? How can we keep the sequence, but we can't afford to whatever, the expensive part of the sequence. We can't, but we can still, how can we still keep the sequence in there to still have that part of the character's, formation or whatever development arc. So it just changes, and that does require, like you say, like, it does require patience. It requires sitting with the directors and really trying to figure it out. How can we accomplish this, and not doing it from a adversarial point of view at all, because that doesn't help anybody. That a line producer, UPM, actually can come at it from that kind of aspect and get away with it, because everybody understands that's their job, is to say no and to do that. But when you're a producer on the film, like, it can't just be no. Like, I can't just walk around saying no to everything. So we got to figure it out. You figure out how do we still get it. So yeah. And yeah, it's interesting that you summarized empathy into patience, but they're very synonymous, right? In that sense.
I suppose one without the other would be a waste of time, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, probably it's still the production period when you say, development, prep, production or post. The production period is still probably the hardest because in post, decisions aren't made at the same speed, right?
Yeah.
Like in post, everybody gets to talk about whether or not you're going to spend more money or you're going to add this song. I mean, that's a decision that even the studio is brought into. Like everybody gets to weigh in and then it's a mutual decision. Even visual effects at some level.
Hmm.
And you may have to drop a shot or whatever if you can't afford that shot. But it's still something that you have sometimes days and I mean in the course of music, you might have months to talk about whether or not you're going to try and include this song. And then the question is the film that much better? And ultimately, are you going to get that many more people buying a ticket because that song isn't right? Is it worth spending $300,000 on this song? Because people are going to have such fond memories of the film, better to talk to their friends about it. So yeah, all that plays into it. And so you don't have an hour's left of daylight on the day that you can't get this location back tomorrow, and you got to figure out how you're going to finish the day. That's a much different decision-making process.
Definitely a different level of urgency behind every decision.
Yeah.
So I also have some listener submitted questions here, and a lot of them actually all kind of fell within the same theme, which is running good crews and teams of people on projects. And the first one that listeners were asking is because film, there's always pivots coming, there's always things changing. So how do you decide when to share information with your crews about potential changes that might be coming up?
That's a great question. It's like when and how, right, Daryl? Like how's the best
Yeah.
and who's the best? Because and Daryl can speak to this with a lot more authority probably than me, as he's been a very intricately involved with all the different department heads through a lot of the movies he's produced. And it, I guess it depends on the kinds of information. You want to disseminate information quickly so that people have time to react to that whole point on urgency. Um, it happens a lot. Daryl and I have been in a lot of scenarios where a change will be made at the top, right? And it usually comes down to two things, like some sort of budgetary constraint or logistic constraint. I guess it'd be three things: budget, logistics, and or creative. So if there's a creative change, and it's usually the creative changes at a production level, even flow down from some sort of budget or logistic constraint, right? Like we lose a location, or the weather has changed, so we have to pivot, or an actor's schedule has changed. And what me and Daryl have been in this situation a million times, where we're sitting there and there's been a failure on set. Something, I mean, every single movie, doesn't matter the budget. There's some breakdown in communication that happened because there's so many people communicating with each other so quickly, and they have so much to do. Like it's really like nobody has any spare time on a production during production days, that at some point something is not going to make it to the right person. And there's a whole podcast to be talked about how you react once that happens, because it's going to happen. And Daryl's better at it than some producers. Some producers lose their stuff and yell at people. I don't find that to be very helpful in the moment, because you have to solve the problem. And so you can sit there and uh, really demean someone for not getting a piece of information, or you can just realize that sometimes it's incompetence, but sometimes it's just the fact that there's so many decisions being made and they're flowing down so quickly that it's going to happen. So deal with it, but it happens very often. And when and how and who communicates those things, there's a lot to that question, but I think as leaders, disseminating big information, like coming to conclusions quickly and in a unified way, and then trying to get that information out as soon as possible, especially on a feature film, is so key. There are mechanisms for that. You have a production office and a production coordinator. A lot of information comes from that person. So if you have a weak production coordinator, and I don't know if you'd agree with me on this, Daryl, that can be a breakdown point right there, or a first AD that's overwhelmed, And if it, this is again comes back to larger production questions, like, if you're not giving your team time, like if the creatives are not prepping properly in the prep period, and are showing up ill prepared to set, the likelihood of breakdowns to start occurring pretty rapidly is high. And me and Daryl have been on sets where directors show up and they didn't prep, they didn't shot list, they didn't prepare. And again, it's not to pick on anybody. They didn't prepare properly, and they really set their team up to fail, because now people are reacting, and that, you might make a decision on set to flip the camera one direction that you didn't prepare for, you didn't communicate out, and a prop master wasn't, like didn't have that prop on his truck that day, or didn't prepare to have it that day, and it just throws everything into a tailspin. So I think it's really about picking good department heads and prepping properly. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Daryl, but as far as communication and how to do it properly, you're a key part of that. So I think you can speak to
Yeah.
that.
I would just add that the opposite of that is also true. So the film we just did, um, every day we shot the call sheet as it was listed, right? Which is
Yes.
for Josh and I is a new experience. Um, and it just hasn't been our experience previously. And as a result, I mean, out of 28 days of shooting, I think we had 2 or 3 days that we went over 12 hours, which is like every other day was under 12 hours, which is also not an experience that Josh and I've had before. So, and the other thing it does is it makes the department heads actually feel respected,
Yeah.
because you're respecting their creative process. You're respecting the work that they put in for each day of having, like as Josh was saying, the right thing on the truck. And that can be every department, really. It could be
Yeah.
wardrobe. Like they didn't intend to have that wardrobe on the truck that day, so it wasn't there. They got to send somebody back to the warehouse to get it. It takes hours to drive back, get it. Um, Props, set dressing, because they're not even there, right? They're not even on the set. So now they've got to send a truck over. They were working on a different set for tomorrow, so now they've got to send somebody over in a truck to bring something. Um, yeah, I mean, even camera grip and electric, right? I mean, they might have had the crane that day, and all of a sudden you're trying to pull off a crane shot, and they got to either get it or order it or build it, and they didn't plan on it. So that really, really wears your crew down when you do that. I mean, if you can pull an audible once or twice in a movie, a big one, and everybody rolls with it. It's like that's
Yep.
just. But if you're doing that on a consistent basis and almost daily basis, like your crew, you will really start to lose your crew, because they'll just, but you don't care. You don't care about what we do. You don't care about our process. You don't care about the time it takes us. You don't respect that we need extra help. If you're going to do that, you're asking, a 5-man crew to do what an 8-man crew is supposed to be doing, because you didn't plan for your day. You didn't so it really can start to create just a lot of complaints, and they're legitimate. As a producer, you're trying to hold everybody together, and it's like, well, yeah, that's actually a legitimate complaint. So, but like I say, on this last one, it was great. Like, we built a call sheet and we shot it every day. And people felt, like you get what I do and you honor what I do. And so yeah, I would say it works both ways.
And I think there's a bit of this, like, a lot of people, they hear the horror stories or the glory stories of having to pull rabbits out of your hat during production. They think that that's the way it should be, right? That's creativity. It's actually not. And like, to Daryl's point, when you're going to have to do that at some point, you're going to be on set, and we have all heard stories about it. Super 8, they're like, I need more dogs in the scene, and some producer runs off and finds dogs and brings it. Like, if you are constantly wearing your crew down with audibles because of your lack of preparation, they'll feel that. And then you'll also lose the ability when it matters. That's something I always kind of try to like talk to directors about. It's like, yeah, you can do that. And these are professionals that are incredibly capable at people, and they're used to pivoting on a dime, and they're really like great at it. But if you keep doing it, it kind of is the boy that cried wolf. At some point, they're just going to go, yeah, we can't make that happen. And it might be the moment when you really needed them to push, and I think Daryl and I saw in this last film, and it was eye-opening. It was like, there were moments where, yep, turns out we had to pivot. Something happened. An actor, they're not getting what they need, or the rain has shifted and we need to shoot something quicker. There are always going to be moments like that, but we had such goodwill with the crew because we were not pulling that crap on them every day. We were doing it, and I think they knew. There are times where we ended days before the 12-hour mark, and people are kind of like, "Wait, what? The day's over?" But because we did that to them when we had to work a couple hours past our wrap time, people weren't mutinying over it. They weren't, that we weren't losing at them. So yeah,
it's fascinating how similar the live events and filmmaking still is, especially with in broadcast we work in 5-minute days. Everything is based on the last 5 minutes, and everything that's going to change is going to happen in 5. That's just how it works. And going from that into the world of corporate and live events, you get about 30 minutes. And so an ask will come down the pipeline and a big pivot that needs to happen. You really just don't have time, but because there's such a crunch, you just have to trust your team. And fortunately, a lot of the guys that I work with are very experienced, and they're very hardened from the road, which doesn't make them nice to work with because we're all pretty rough, and you kind of have to be, because a lot of the asks, sometimes you'll get something from somebody who is not over you, or something from a project manager who's really not involved with the big picture stuff, and you have to filter through your mind, and it's, do we take this up the chain right now, or do we make the adjustment? And it, camera angles, placement of lighting systems, there are so many changes on the day of, and problems with, hey, sales pitched a whole lighting rig for outside, and we have everything for inside right now. Hey, we got 2 hours till we open doors. Where's this stuff coming from? And that kind of gets pushed on our production manager and the leads to be like, hey, is this something that we got to make work, or is this something that we have to get here ASAP? There's a joke in the industry. There's nothing more expensive than the day of, because of the ads, because of the little things, because you'll get a designer come in and be like, yo, you know what if we had Scenic do a couple drape things up in the sky over here? What if we added like some chandelier? It just happens. And I think the difference between coming from the broadcast world and the events world and film was, I always found that film and events to be the most patient and understanding people of changes. Whereas when you're in a truck and somebody says, hey, we're changing everything right now, there's an internal blow up. We just all explode. Oh my God, why do we have to do just everything's wrong? Everything's the biggest issue. And for what? That is something that I know whenever I go back and I do a show with a lot of the old teams that I used to work with, and they know it too. I could say this on here, and they could listen, and they're going to laugh. They're going to be like, "Oh my God, yeah, that's me." The guys throwing stuff out of the trucks. Oh yeah, we were those guys. It's how we were. And when I moved out of that and I came back and did one job, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're so quiet now." Like where's the temper? Where's anything? I see those asks come down, and me just shutting my mouth and doing whatever's coming from the top as personal growth. And I think a lot of very talented professionals who treat those pivots like that probably have had the same experience that I have, where you spend 3 weeks planning out a shot, working out something very, very technical, to just have it completely undermined on the day of. And your sense of pride kind of gets tickled just right, and you're like, oh my god, like this is something that I can't lose. And in my experience, I'm okay with losing it now. It's something to work past. It's something to make the production happen. It's something to get the experience up and off the ground. And if we have to lose it and replace it with something else, that's what has to happen. And that's for the speed of the production, that's for the quality and the suffrage of the people on top and the people below as well, regardless of how cool something was, or if we have it or not. Sometimes it's just not there. And I hate to just throw it out there, but it is what it is. Comes out way too much in my industry. And I remember doing commercials, and we'd be like, hey, like who put in the order for the lighting truck? And everybody just looks at each other. Okay, looks like we're making some phone calls. Got an hour till we shoot. Let's make this happen. And mistakes happen, and I've been on both sides. I've been on producer side. I've been on the ground as a lead. And I don't know, that kind of stuff used to bother me more. And it's slowly bothering me less and less. And dare I say I'm empathizing as well. Oh, God.
Sounds like patience, Nathan.
It does sound like patience. Man, it's the header for this one. But yeah, it's interesting to hear similar issues, and to know that I think in today's world we're slowly leaning into a place where those screaming directors and those screaming producers are slowly getting cut out.
Yeah.
But when I was starting, and still there's a lot of people that I work with that it's just a big it's just a big fight all the time, when it doesn't really need to be. And it's tough to not get so consumed with your production and remember that there are people behind the pens, and there isn't all the money in the world to just do whatever you want to do. So yeah, it's comforting to hear similar experiences here.
Because we repeated a lot, or one of our directors did repeat it a lot in the morning before we start. We'd always get together, and it was starting off as a safety meeting, but then it was always turned into like sort of an appreciation for the day before, and outlook for the day ahead. And the director would say, people over product a lot. Just the people are more important than what we're making. So
I'd love to kind of jump a little bit on what you were talking there, Daryl. Just because there's a question here that goes well with that. But just like when you have those tough times where you have to do that pivot, and whether it's weather or whatever, it's like, yeah, this stinks, but we just have to go this route. Like, what are ways you have found to help encourage like the crew morale on those moments?
I think one is you gotta let them voice it. Like if they feel the need to reiterate. I mean, you also can't slow down the process and all that. But as long as their team is working, and the department head feels the need to just let you know just how how much this messes up their day, or whatever the amount of time it's going to take and all that. I think if you shut them down, that's not going to help. Even though I've been doing this long enough, I pretty much already know what's involved and what the problem is and how, I get it. But if I shut them down and don't let them at least vocalize it and feel like they've been heard, I think that then you're really in trouble, because then, they just feel disrespected and like you don't care about what they do, or you don't understand what they do. And so I think giving them that minute to go ahead and do that and just accept it, and empathize with them and say,
Yeah.
I did it. Unfortunately, that's the situation we're in. We don't really have any other choice right now. Um, but at least people just like to be heard. I like to be heard. I mean, people just like to be heard. They like
Yeah.
even if it doesn't change the outcome, right? It doesn't change it, and maybe it will because they might come up with an idea that's even better, which is great if that happens. But sometimes people just need to be able to say what they need to say and feel like somebody heard them, and then we can all move on. So yeah, I think it's a big part of it.
When everyone feels like you've done your part, but this is an unavoidable kind of problem, they have more empathy than if you show up late and if you're not prepping properly, if you're not communicating. Like those vocal sessions that Daryl's talking about get louder and more intense when they feel like they're not being respected. But if it is what it is, a lot of times these guys are all professionals and they roll with it. But if you've made deposits into the relational bank accounts of these people throughout the process, it's a lot easier.
Mhm.
It's how we learn. I mean, some of the toughest situations that were crunch time that somebody's like, "Hey, I got an idea," and like I've done this before. I can't tell you how many guys that I've seen in those situations just be like, "Oh, be quiet. Let me fix it," and we spend way too much time on that problem. And um, I get to work with people all over the nation. Um, and I've just learned so much from those crunch time moments of being like, we need to get this done. And somebody out of the blue is like, hey, like, what if you did this? And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, like why have I never thought of this before? And it's bred into all these different relationships that I have across all these crew members, people that I would never have thought had certain technical abilities just because you kind of get your tunnel vision. You're doing whatever your task is and you have to get it done in X amount of time. And then some voice comes out of the blue and you're like, do I need to listen to this right now? My answer is always yes. Because it's I consider it a form of education. Even if it's not a good idea, even if it's something completely out of the blue, from a technical standpoint, you just never know when that little comment or that little something could just inspire another idea and solve your particular problem. Just a little bit of listening. Oh, wow. So we patience. Now we're in listening.
Not wrong.
It's also amazing how sometimes like we've even on this past movie, but we've been on sets, I've been on sets where, we could easily have, two condors going, probably six other lights going, and then practical lights and whatnot. And well, that's the way we got to shoot the scene. And then a lightning strike happens within, the safety distance, and all of a sudden we're shooting the scene with available light. And I'm like, um, so
Mhm.
so it's amazing that sometimes there are simple solutions to things that when on the face of it, it was like, well, there's a lightning strike, we got to shut down, we can't shoot anything, we're done for the day, whatever. And all of a sudden we can keep on shooting with just like the practical lights and an LED light that plugs into the wall of the house we're shooting in, and somehow we got the scene, so
Mm.
it kind of goes both ways. Like you kind of need to let everybody calm down for a second, and then all of a sudden cooler heads prevail, and you can come up with solutions that I didn't even know were possible, but amazingly they are. So yeah, we finished every day on this one.
There have been very few, probably for you too, Daryl, like occasions where something has happened, some act of God or some sort of thing that stops your day, that crews don't find a solution around, and usually it in some ways it's better than the path you were on.
Right.
It starts raining, they figure out a way. If it's lightning, power goes out, like they keep moving.
Right.
There's been very
Yeah.
few days that I've ever had that were stopped, dead in their tracks. Some, but usually crews are very resourceful people.
Yeah.
And it becomes a morale thing too. I
It does.
find that like when you start listening to people and being like, oh yeah, let's try that. If one guy or one gal is like, oh, like I actually was heard and listened to, and like, wow, I have a responsive director. I have a responsive producer. I'm not just working with somebody who's going to sign my check. I am working with someone who's going to, number one, listen, and number two, be there for me also to ask a question. I always love that when, as a camera operator, when a DP would come to me or a producer would come to me like what can we do with this scene? Like what can we do? Like this is so dead. Let we need a flair. We need something to make this interesting. What are your thoughts? And they just start going around the room and start asking different people. And it's a very private, intimate conversation of like, what are your thoughts? I might not use what you have to say, but I'm curious what you would bring to the table right now. That is such a, and you don't always get the to exercise that on crews. Obviously, there we have time crunches and things, but that was always a wonderful special moment for me working with directors and producers.
I'll give you a practical example on Unsung Hero of a problem kind of turning out to be a better solution than our initial kind of solution. We were going to film, if you've seen the movie, there's a kind of a finale, not a finale scene, but in the middle of the movie, basically a church, I'm spoiling it if you haven't, so sorry. But the church basically comes to the rescue of the Smallbone family, and they bring in all this furniture and everything they needed. And it's this very sweet, kind of uplifting moment. We were supposed to shoot it inside. It was supposed to be the scene where everybody was inside the house and they knock on the door, they open the door, and all these people come in with gifts and washers and dryers and beds. And it's just a really sweet, big moment in the story where the community comes together to help. Our house the day before, I think someone discovered mold or something was in the house and we weren't able to shoot. The unions basically were like, you cannot shoot inside the house. And it's like literally the night before. So like we wrapped the day, we didn't, like the producers unit kind of came together and we're like, oh shoot. So at the end of the day, we wrap, everyone's like clapping that we made our day. And then we took the directors aside and we're like, so tomorrow, your whole scene where you're all inside and you can't shoot inside. And I remember the team kind of came together and it was actually with one of the writer directors on that, thought for a second, and instead of yelling at the producers for their incompetency of picking a house that had something wrong inside of it or locations for missing, whatever the issue was, they came together and he just started thinking and he was like, it'd actually be pretty cool if the family came outside and walked through and was able to kind of experience it, and we could actually make a bigger shot of it. And the truth is, it looks better creatively. If you watch the movie, you'll be like, of course, why would they ever have gone inside? Now you can see the scope of the trucks and all the people. And so we shot the whole scene outside, and we're not allowed inside the house. You'll notice nobody is inside the house when that shot comes on. There's a scene inside the house. It's a totally different house. And when it's outside the house, nobody is ever, there might be someone in the doorway, but nobody's actually inside the house. And there you go. I mean, it was a better solution than our original solution. Sometimes that happens, it's always sweet when it does.
There was one last question. I heard this question and I got me thinking even about myself, but the question is, what's one failure that you wouldn't be where you are without?
It's a really good question.
I think I have one. It's not a big mistake, but it definitely changed my perspective on what I was looking for in my career and how to approach working with bigger clients and working on a higher level of production. So some perspective, at the time I was working as a PA with great television, and we were just doing morning show. But it was my first experience working directly with a senior broadcast director. And basically I did everything that I could possibly do wrong in succession. I showed up late, set up pretty much everything incorrectly. I did not have the schedule memorized, which was if you don't know your schedule and you got a timeline, you're in trouble. I downloaded the next day's content for all of our lower thirds and slides for our newscasters bit right before the show. So it was kind of a mess. It was not great. And so I was incredibly distraught. This guy was just screaming at me and telling me basically that, like, if you're not fired at the end of the day, I would be very surprised. And I was like, okay, well, I put all this work in to work in, to, oh my God, television. It's such a high pedestal for myself. And I was sitting in the lunchroom, and this guy like looks over at me, and he's like, "Hey man, it's just another Wednesday. Get over it." Yeah, but like I started explaining like what was going on. He's like, "Yeah. I've had one of these too. Like tomorrow's Thursday. What's the problem?" Like, okay. And his just not caring at all, and just get it done, do your best, and move on. Like, yeah, you might get fired. Yeah, you might. What's the worst thing? But you're going to learn and move on to the next day. And when you're working in any technical positions, you are going to have an incredibly bad day at some point. And people are going to point fingers at you, and people are going to tear you apart, and you're going to have that particular person just over your shoulder, just beating you up. And finding a little bit of peace and just moving on to the next day. Keep doing what you're doing. That's basically been my entire broadcast career, because things go bad. There's issues, there's changes, there's so much chaos. But if you just calm down and be like, you know what, tomorrow's just another day. It really helps calm your mind to focus in on what you're doing in the moment, and not get so caught up on all these expectations, all this pressure, that you can just get yourself to a level of peace where, oh, all right, so I made a mistake, move on. And yeah, I was very green. Yeah, I was making mistakes and having problems. But it's not worth getting that upset over. And from that point on, it was so much easier to keep a cool and calm head, even when things were going bad, even when things were extremely rough. I think about this weird dude just like eating a tuna sandwich, like sitting next to me in a lunchroom, just be like, wow, there's another crying kid. Like it, somehow that image still sticks in my mind on some of the most chaotic shows that I've been on. And regardless of the risk, I'm like, you know what, tomorrow's going to be another day. And thankfully, I don't screw up as much. But if I had been like, you know what, I'm screw this, I'm not gonna do this anymore. I can't take the pressure. I can't take the heat of this. What a disservice I would have done to myself, instead of just finding my own little peace and just moving on.
I can tell a quick story of mine. Daryl actually has been on all the productions I've almost been a part of, so he has had a front row seat to this. But I started very young in the industry, working for two directors, and I was so eager, and I was very driven, and I always wanted to prove myself in any capacity so that I could show people that I was worthy of being there, which is imposter syndrome we all have. But I was, at that point, I was actually an imposter. So the I was trying to, I was very eager to show my worth to these guys. And on one of my first films, there was a situation where department heads were griping and they needed to vent. And someone called a meeting, and I was invited in. And we were talking about that. Really, just a lot of these department heads were just airing some grievances, and they're all pretty valid, actually. At the time, I was department head at a pretty young age. And I overheard it, and I was pretty frustrated by it because I felt like they were attacking the directors, and I took that information to the directors, and it caused a situation on set that was pretty frustrating for everybody involved, and in that moment I felt like I was being loyal to the directors. I was looking out for them and was trying to help them. But the truth is, at the rest of that shoot, I had lost the trust with a lot of the crew members I was working with. And it took many years to build back trust in those situations with some of those individuals. And it really didn't help the directors. In fact, it probably hurt I know it hurt some of the process, and I thought I was helping because I was being loyal to them and I was bringing it to them, and I realized like, and it has helped me a lot in my career that everybody on a film set is dealing with problems. They're trying to solve their department's problems, and ultimately, all those things serve the film. And so if you instead of approaching it from that eager, let me show how I can prove myself to the guys on top, the very next film, because I ended that film with everyone pretty much hating me. I did a good job in my department, and I delivered on what I was supposed to, but I did it very alone. And when in rap, I remember feeling very like this kind of emptiness, like is very sad. Like you end a project, you're supposed to be high-fiving each other. You have friends that you're going to work with for many years. And I felt like everyone kind of hated me. The directors were fine. I don't think they really thought about it very much other than, oh, it was nice Josh brought that to us. And, they used it in the moment and they moved on. Right. But I was stuck having to deal with all the people and work with them for the rest of the shoot. And I realized, man, you got to work with people. And a film set is so collaborative. It's so relational that my very next film, my approach was, how do I help solve these people's problems? So when I hear someone griping, or if I hear, because it was such a painful lesson that I learned on that, I thought, okay, and it's been my mentality ever since, and hopefully Daryl can attest to this, but if someone comes in with a problem, it's not like, oh, that person's a problem. It's more, my approach has been, how can I help that person? Now, their approach might be different. It might not be perfect, the way that they're venting or expressing their problems. But if you have that service mentality, and I think I switched my thinking because it was so painful, to how do I serve these people? And that's how I'm going to grow in my leadership and eventually be a producer, not by, proving my loyalty to the top. It was more about how do we serve these people. And I think that has served me better as a producer throughout my career. And I actually have a lot of relationships that were even from that film to this day, where I've been able to mend it and build on those. But I learned in those moments, man, sometimes it's easy to take the quick win, but it has a lot of long-term ramifications. And I think if I would have kept on that pattern, I probably wouldn't have worked on many more movies, but that one was a painful enough lesson for me. I think everybody came to me because I was kind of proud of the fact that I was loyal. So I didn't try to hide the fact that I was the one that kind of brought it to the attention of the directors. And yeah, it wasn't an easy experience the rest of that movie, but I learned a great lesson with working with people, and I realized that I can actually help solve the director's problems by helping solve the problems of these department heads, and definitely changed my outlook on how to help people and help the process of making a film. You've got to serve people. There's like, if you have a mentality at the top that everyone is there to serve you, you're not going to make many movies, or if you do, you're not going to get the best out of people. That's for sure.
Yeah, the simplest thing that comes to mind is this pretty brief. So I started off interning as like a grip and electric on student films. Then I was a driver. Then I moved to LA and I was an office PA. And as an office PA, I was pretty good at the actual important things, like, making the new script change color copies and inserting them and doing errands and that kind of stuff. But I was not good at all the, because I was 27 years old at this point. I had like a real job with a company car and expense account, and I'd been out in the world and whatever. So at 27, when you've already had that, and then you're like, okay, I want to get into film, so I'm willing to do whatever, but I wasn't really willing to do whatever. So it was like, I felt like I'd already kind of lived some, I was married, I had a kid, it was like, and so I remember going out and getting lunch one day, and it was right before we start shooting. So those lunch orders, for 20 some people, and you're trying to pick them up and you're trying to get everything back and keep everything warm and make sure everything's right, whatever. And I get back and I'm lining up all these different, trying to put names on them and stuff, and all these people and get them dished out to the right people. So I have a lot of empathy for office PS. But this one person ordered iced tea, and I was just like, I'm not doing it. Like, I'm trying to carry 24 things of styrofoam packed food. And on top of that, I'm not carrying your iced tea with a straw sticking out the top. Like, it's not, and I'm not putting it in my car. Like, it's just not happening. And so I get back, and the person came up, and I just had a lot of attitude about it because I just was not gonna try, and this was pre-cup holder days too, I think, whatever. But I just was not, I wasn't gonna try and force an iced tea into this thing. I was like, you know what, there's iced tea in the fridge. Like, get an iced tea. I don't know what to tell you. And so I got this reputation of being a bad PA. It's like, even though all the other stuff, like my APOC and POC, were really happy with all the other like real job things, but that particular part of it, was just not working. And so I had to kind of learn within myself that I do have my own sort of sarcasm limits. I mean, I wasn't gonna actually be nasty. Like I wasn't like wasn't like tell the person off, but I was just like, you know, you, like I'm not getting your iced tea. It's just this way to, and so it was in that moment that I was like, I need to do something else. Like I need to find out what I'm actually doing in this industry. Like obviously you're not going to be an office PA for 30 years. So it really forced me to be like, all right, what am I going to do? And I remember watching these accountants come in, like an hour or two after I'd already been there, and they leave at 6:30 and I'm still there till 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I was like, well, I can do that. Like I can do that. And I had a kid at the time. So it was really it was that kind of stuff that got me into doing accounting in the first place, was, just being responsible and being like, this is something I can do, and getting away from things that just got me into a department, which I'm always telling people, like, if you start off as a PA, that's fine, but then figure out what department you want to be in. You got to get in something, you got to get a department. You can't be a PA forever. So yeah, so that got me in. It was really that got me into accounting. And then I did that for, like I say, 14, 16 years. And then that was a good step to get into producing, because I understood schedules and budgets and dealing with department heads and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's probably the easiest one.
Well, thank you guys for being willing to share some of those more failure moments. I know that's not always the part of the career that people want to actually open up about. But yeah,
we got plenty. We could just keep going, probably. Probably.
We learn the most from it.
Yes, that is true. We'll go ahead then and wrap up this episode of the Producer Podcast. But thank you all once again for taking the time to come back onto the show.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Micah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was wonderful.
And with that, we're going to roll the credits on the 100th episode of the Producer Podcast and season 10 of the show. Thank you to all of our many listeners who have joined us for the journey so far. Stay tuned for season 11 of the show coming in 2026. Until then, follow us on social media, pick up your copy of the Producer's Life book, and keep listening.